Did you know that Cedric Diggory gets tortured inside the maze during the third task of the Triwizard Tournament? Or that Harry faces a Sphinx, Dementor, and a blast-ended Scroot along his path to victory? Well, if you've only ever watched the Goblet of Fire movie, or if it's been a while since you've read the book, you probably never knew these interesting details from Harry's fourth year at Hogwarts. Unfortunately, while the fourth movie in the Harry Potter series is entertaining, it lacks many of the core details from the original story. In fact, I'd say that the third task of the Triwizard Tournament is almost unrecognizable in the movie. You've got a maze, but that's where the similarities stop. The lead up to this final challenge, the obstacles within the maze, and much more are completely altered for the film adaptation. So, in today's video, I'm going to unpack the dark truth about what really transpired within the hedges of the Triwizard Maze. We'll see how Harry prepared for this challenge and how he overcame its obstacles within. But more importantly, I'll share with you how he nearly lost his life, how Cedric faced his darkest moment yet, and how they both fell into the graveyard outside of the old Riddle House in Little Hangleton. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 57 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter Edition. Welcome back to Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter, your number one stop for all things wizarding. If you enjoy book-to-film analysis, fun facts, and deep dives into the lore of Harry Potter, then consider subscribing. We've got a goal to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you want to help out, then share this with a Harry Potter-loving friend. Before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, Robo Steve, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the four major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happens during this scene in the movie, which is a quite brief 10 minutes when compared to the hour-long chapter in the book. Picking up from where we left off last week with Harry viewing Dumbledore's memories in the Pensieve, the movie cuts to the stands outside of the maze and a crowd cheering for the champions as they enter. Dumbledore silences the crowd and gives instructions to the champions, and then the task begins as Harry makes his way into the maze. Inside the maze, we see Krum attack Fleur, Harry run into Krum, who leaves him alone, and then Harry saves Fleur, who is being dragged under the hedges. Then, a little later, Harry runs into Krum and Cedric, who are fighting, and Cedric makes quick work of the Bulgarian with Expelliarmus, which I guess knocks people out cold without ever disarming them now? Anyway, after Harry stops Cedric from finishing off Krum, they both start running toward the Triwizard Cup, which they can see in the distance. The hedges start lashing out with vines and grab onto Cedric, who yells for help. Harry stops running and decides to help Cedric out, and then they run up to the cup and take it together as a whirlwind approaches. And that is the end of the scenes that we're covering in today's episode. So let's kick things off by going into our first three categories of characters, timeline, and location. To start, let's take a look at characters. As we'll discuss in the plot changes section, there's a part before the third task where we see all the families of the champions come to Hogwarts. So technically, we're missing the families of Fleur, Krum, and Cedric. Yes, Amos Diggory is shown in the movie, but there's a speaking part with him in this chapter that's very interesting. In the same way, although we see Harry's classmates in the stands, Draco Malfoy has a more involved role in this chapter as well. At least more involved than just jeering in a crowd. Also, the Dursleys obviously don't come to cheer on Harry, so Mrs. Weasley and Bill come to give him support instead. Additionally, we're missing Ludo Bagman, per usual, and Rita Skeeter is mentioned also. Now for timeline, the movie simply condenses the days and weeks leading up to the third task. While the beginning of this chapter in the book fills us in on what the trio were up to during this time, the movie cuts straight from the Pensieve scene to the third task. And finally, for our location category, we have a couple of changes. First, because there's no time between the Pensieve scene and the third task in the movie, they obviously cut out everywhere the trio went during that time in the chapter. This is mostly around the castle, and more specifically, the Transfiguration classroom, the Great Hall, and the Gryffindor Common Room. As for our second change, I want to clarify that the maze wasn't an endless thing like the movie seems to show. It didn't go on for infinity. Essentially, the Quidditch pitch was replaced with stands and a maze. I'm sure it was big, but not miles and miles long like what the movie seems to show us. And you know how everyone jokes about how the second and third task would have been the worst ones to watch in the stands, because in the second task, you'd just be staring at the lake, and in the third task, you'd just be staring at a hedge? Well, I was thinking it would have been really cool if they actually put the maze inside the middle of the Quidditch pitch and kept the stands super high like the movie shows around, because then everyone in the stands could look down into the maze and see what the champions were doing, but the champions would still be lost inside of the maze. Maybe that's what J.K. Rowling meant all along and we've just misunderstood it, but I think that would have been pretty cool. Anyway, before we jump into the plot changes, I just want to remind you that I can't go through each bit of dialogue because that would take forever. Plus, I'd actually recommend you relive these conversations word for word for yourself. So be sure to check out the audiobooks on Audible, and you can use my link in the description to claim the Goblet of Fire or any other book of your choice for free. You get a 30-day free trial and you can cancel at any time. Plus, it supports the channel, so it's a win-win. Now with that being said, let's dive into the all-important plot changes. To start things off, we have a quick omitted moment at the beginning of the chapter in which Harry, Ron, and Hermione are all discussing the recent information that Harry gathered in Dumbledore's Pensieve. We read that Harry had immediately written a letter to Sirius to update him that night and then filled Hermione and Ron in on what he'd learned. Hermione mumbles under her breath about Rita Skeeter and then reminds the boys what she had said in the Three Broomsticks about how she knew stuff about Ludo Bagman, and then how Winky also said Ludo Bagman was a bad wizard. Now, if you don't remember, this is in reference to the memory that Harry saw in which Ludo Bagman was put on trial for accidentally passing information to Lord Voldemort. Then Ron makes a comment about how Fudge thinks Madame Maxime could have been behind the attack on Barty Crouch, and Ron seems to slightly agree, saying that Madame Maxime definitely has some giant in her that she keeps trying to hide. This sends Hermione on a rant, who says that she'd also claim to be big-boned if people would always assume she's a monster for being a half-giant. After their discussion, Hermione sends the boys to bed, saying that Harry needs his rest. As Harry goes to bed, he remembers what he learned about Neville's parents, which is a detail he didn't share with Ron and Hermione. He thinks about how it's worse for Neville, who still has parents alive, but they don't recognize him. And this makes Harry all the more angry at Voldemort before he goes to sleep. The next part of the chapter picks up with telling us about what the trio did during the following days as they prepared for the third task, and that is our next change. We read that the trio practiced hexes and curses and charms every single day. Specifically, Harry learned the Impediment Curse, Reductor Curse, and the 4-point spell. And McGonagall got so tired of catching them inside empty classrooms that she eventually just let them use her own Transfiguration classroom during lunchtime. But more importantly than this general information, we read about one specific time they were practicing and Harry looked outside through a window and saw Draco Malfoy on the school grounds. He was standing under a tree with his palm cupped to his mouth, and he seemed to be speaking into it. Harry is confused by this as he watched Crabbe and Goyle laugh off to the side at whatever Draco was saying, and he tells Hermione that it looks like Draco is using a walkie-talkie, but she reminds him that that's not possible because electronics don't work on school grounds. Then they move on with their day. But tuck this away for just a moment because this detail helps Hermione later on figure out exactly what Rita Skeeter was up to. Another omitted section is when we read about how many letters Sirius had been sending Harry. Evidently, it had become a daily thing, as Sirius wanted to stay up to date on everything happening at school. One of the letters he wrote said that as long as Harry was under Dumbledore's protection, nothing could happen to him. Obviously, that didn't work out so well, but I understand the sentiment in the moment. Sirius essentially was trying to make Harry focus on the third task and forget about what happened to Barty Crouch, as that still plagued Harry's mind. Ultimately, Harry's preparation did pay off, because we read that Harry was nervous for the third task, but not as nervous as he was for the first two, because at least for this one he felt prepared, and he was happy that it would soon be all over. And that brings us to our next change, which is the removal of yet another Rita Skeeter article. As readers of the book know, there are many subplots within the Goblet of Fire. Rita Skeeter is one of those subplots, and the movie just decided to remove it. Yes, they included her just enough to be seen and cause drama, but her actual ending is much darker. It's not an end we'll see in this episode, but it'll get resolved in the coming chapters. In this episode, we simply have another article on the front page of the Daily Prophet that rips Harry to shreds. Somehow, Rita had gotten information that Harry had passed out in divination class, and she claimed that he was unwell and shouldn't be allowed to compete in the Triwizard Tournament or even go to school at Hogwarts. She also includes a quote from Draco Malfoy about how Harry can speak Parseltongue. All of this makes Hermione even more furious as she still hasn't figured out how Rita is doing it. After all, Rita isn't allowed on school grounds, so how is she finding out about this information? It isn't until Harry makes a remark about magical bugging that Hermione goes glossy-eyed and seems to have a revelation of sorts, jumping up and running off to the library without an explanation to the boys. And unfortunately, that's where I have to stop with this subplot for now, but I can't wait to dive into it more in a couple episodes. Next up, we read about the arrival of the champions' families. Ron leaves Harry at the breakfast table to go off to his History of Magic exam. Remember, exams were the same day as the third task, and champions were exempt from taking them, so Harry was left alone in the Great Hall. Shortly before, McGonagall had come up and told Harry to head to the chamber off to the side of the Great Hall where the families of the champions were gathering. Harry did not want to go though because he figured there were two options. Option A is that the Dursleys came, which he found really unbelievable, or option B, no one came, and he would have to stand there alone amidst the other champions' families. Well, thankfully for Harry, neither option was true. Cedric poked his head out of the offset chamber and shouted for Harry to join them, and so Harry reluctantly did. Upon entering though, his spirits were lifted as he saw Mrs. Weasley and Bill there to greet him. It's a heartfelt moment that reminds us who Harry's true family really is. In the chamber, Harry sees Fleur's mom, Victor's parents, and Amos Diggory and his wife. Also, there's a funny side note here that Harry saw Fleur staring at Bill the whole time, which is obviously foreshadowing for their future relationship. Foreshadowing that we never got in the movie, by the way, and is very confusing later on when Fleur is suddenly married to Bill with no explanation. By the way, another key detail from inside the chamber is when Harry goes to leave with the Weasleys and Amos Diggory makes a comment on the way out. He obviously is upset by what he's been reading in the Daily Prophet from Rita Skeeter, and he remarks that Harry probably isn't feeling as high and mighty now that Cedric has caught up to him in points. Cedric tells Harry to ignore his dad, but Amos continues to make rude remarks, and eventually Mrs. Weasley speaks up, saying that Amos should know better than to believe everything Rita Skeeter writes. Eventually, Mrs. Diggory calmed her husband down, and Mrs. Weasley, Bill, and Harry left the chamber. Harry showed them around the castle, and he asked them how Percy was doing. Mrs. Weasley said that Percy hasn't been doing well, as he's been questioned by the Ministry quite a bit recently. She says that it isn't public knowledge yet, but they believe the instructions Percy was receiving could have been forgeries. Percy was going to fill in as judge for the third task in place of Mr. Crouch, but Fudge is filling in himself instead. Finally, Ron and Hermione rejoin them at lunchtime after finishing up their morning exams, and Ginny and the twins join as well. There's one final detail to this whole family section that I find hilarious, and it's that as Hermione approached and said hello, Mrs. Weasley gave her a very cold greeting that Harry noticed right away. He then asked Mrs. Weasley if she's been reading Witch Weekly and told her that Hermione isn't his girlfriend. At this, Mrs. Weasley perked back up and started being nice to Hermione again. Now, I read this two ways. The first could be that Mrs. Weasley thinks Hermione is using Harry and Victor, and she doesn't like that, or it could also be interpreted as her being upset because she knows her son Ron likes Hermione, and therefore she doesn't like that Hermione is dating Harry. I know that second option might be a bit of a retcon, but I like it anyway. Now, guess what? We're finally to the third task itself. After a day of hanging out with the Weasleys and a nice pre-task dinner feast, the whole school went down to the Quidditch pitch and got ready for the final task. There are a few changes in here and then a few omitted moments that I think you'll find very interesting, including details about Cedric's involvement, which falls utterly short in the movie. First up, a small change we have is that McGonagall is the one who gives them instructions. Dumbledore really isn't involved much here, as Ludo Bagman handles most of this. We read that several professors came out in uniforms, and McGonagall instructed the champions to use red sparks if they needed help. If they did that, one of the professors would head into the maze and get the champion out. Then Ludo Bagman takes over with the announcing portion of the program and blows a whistle to start Harry and Cedric off into the maze, which by the way only had one entrance, not 4 separate starting points. So after reaching the first split in the maze, they parted ways. And speaking of which, that brings us to our first omitted moment, which is that a while after separating, Harry ran back into Cedric, who was looking a little worse for wear with singed robes. He told Harry that he ran into one of Hagrid's blast-ended Scroots, which were now fully grown. Cedric tells Harry that he just barely escaped, and then he dove out of sight again, leaving Harry alone. And then Harry finally encounters his first obstacle, which of course is nowhere to be found in the movie. After Cedric leaves, Harry continues on and rounds a corner, coming face to face with a Dementor. Harry immediately is struck with fear, but then came to himself and used his powerful Patronus to knock the Dementor backward. But he realized that he's never seen a Dementor fall over before, and that's when he figured out that it wasn't a Dementor at all, but a Boggart. Remembering what Professor Lupin had taught them the previous year, Harry used the spell Ridiculous to get past the creature. It's also important to know that the 4-point spell was very useful to him inside of the maze. This is something the movie removed, but in the book, we read that the 4-point spell essentially turned your wand into a compass. So throughout the task, we read about Harry intermittently using the spell to check his direction and make sure he was still heading the same way, instead of heading backwards toward the stadium. I know it's a small detail, but it's the little things like that which help round out the wizarding world and make it feel more real. Anyway, after some more running, Harry reached his next obstacle, which was a wall of mist. Harry tries to use Reducto on it, but the spell just goes right through. He hesitated for a moment, not sure if this was a trap, but before he could decide to turn around, he heard a scream on the other side, and it sounded like Fleur. So, the hero as always, Harry got the courage to charge through the wall and found himself hanging upside down. Well, at least that's what he felt like. Although his feet were still on the ground, his entire orientation had flipped so that the sky looked like it was beneath him. As the blood started to rush to his head, he stood still and thought, scared that if he took a step, he might fall into the sky. But he couldn't think of a single spell to help him in this moment. So, with his eyes closed, he raised his foot and tried to take a step forward. As soon as he did, the world righted itself and he fell to the ground. But unable to take too long to celebrate this small win, he ran off in search of Fleur. After all, he didn't see red sparks, so she could have been seriously hurt or maybe even lost her wand. But that brings up another change, which is that Harry never actually finds Fleur, and he never saves her. We don't find out what happens to Fleur until later on. But anyway, after running for a bit, Harry encountered yet another obstacle. And you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of challenges. Well, it is compared to the movie, which essentially just turned the maze into a mental sport. And come to think of it, Dumbledore in the movie even says something like that before they enter, telling them that they won't find crazy monsters, but they'll have to face themselves, which is just very ominous and spooky and completely wrong. The maze was full of things that could kill you, and this third obstacle was no different. It was a blast-ended Scroot, probably the same one that got Cedric earlier. Trying to dodge blasts from its end, Harry used the impediment curse to slow the beast down. However, it only worked once he hit the soft part of its belly. Every time he tried to curse its tough exterior, it wouldn't work. Thankfully, he hit the right part just before he was going to die. And you know, I really don't understand how this competition is considered safe. They're supposed to send up red sparks if they need help, but what if they just get killed immediately, or drop their wand? It's starting to make sense why this tournament was outlawed in the first place, but that's beside the point. After escaping the blast-ended Scroot, Harry encountered his next problem. But this wasn't an obstacle in the maze, this was the cry of Cedric. He could hear him on the other side of the hedge shouting at someone, and before Harry could do anything, he heard a loud Crucio from the other side, and Cedric cried out. So Harry did the only thing he could think of and used Reducto to blast a hole through the hedge and get to the other side. And this is where he saw Crumb using the Cruciatus curse on Cedric. Acting quickly, Harry used Stupefy on Crumb, knocking him to the ground, and then helped Cedric get up. While Cedric recovered, the two boys discussed what just happened, with both of them in disbelief. The unforgivable curses landed any wizard in Azkaban for life. Harry couldn't imagine that Crumb wanted to win the tournament so bad that he'd use an unforgivable curse on another human. Something wasn't right. Harry asked Cedric if he heard Fleur earlier too, and Cedric said he did, asking if maybe Crumb got to her earlier. Then, with Cedric recovered, he sent up red sparks, marking where Crumb lay on the ground. And then the two boys split up once again, going their separate ways to look for the cup. Now, I know that Cedric is about to face something worse in the next chapter as he and Harry land in the graveyard, but it's moments like this that I wish were in the movie. Cedric was actually a really decent guy in the book, and we learn a lot more about him throughout the story, which helps us feel more attached for when the end comes. But the movie kind of ruined his character. I mean, he attacks Crumb in the maze and then goes up to him as if he's gonna finish him off on the ground, which is very out of character for a Hufflepuff and for Cedric. In the movie, we see Harry literally holding him back, and then Cedric says, "Get off me," and runs away. In the book, though, Cedric talks with Harry and treats him as a friend. He assumes the best of people, even to the point of letting Crumb attack him first. He's a true Hufflepuff, not some deranged boy like what the movie shows. But let me know in the comments if you think this moment should have been included, or if they made the right decision to remove it. Anyway, that's not even it, because not only does Cedric get tortured with the Cruciatus curse, but he and Harry encounter yet another obstacle later on. But before that, we have one more challenge that Harry must face alone. After splitting up with Cedric, Harry runs into a Sphinx. That's right, a Sphinx. These are massive creatures who are more than happy to eat you for lunch. However, they also enjoy a good brain teaser, and will let you pass them if you get it right. If not, well, it looks like you'll be on the menu. And the thing is, you can simply walk away if you want. You don't have to participate in its game. But in order to reach the Triwizard Cup from that path, Harry had to pass the Sphinx. So he agreed to the game, and luckily figured out the answer to its riddle. I won't go through the exact riddle right now, so go ahead and check out the audiobook if you want to hear it. Anyway, after passing the Sphinx, Harry saw the trophy in the distance and started running. But Cedric came out onto the path a little ways in front of him. Cedric started running toward the trophy, and Harry saw something in the path start to chase him, and he knew exactly what it was. A massive spider. He yelled after Cedric, trying to warn him, but Cedric wasn't stopping as he could see the finish line just a little ways away. Unfortunately, he should have listened to Harry, as the spider crept up behind him and attacked. Harry quickly used Stupefy to distract it, and that worked, causing the beast to turn around and run after him instead. Before Harry could do anything, the spider bit his leg and lifted him into the air. Thankfully, Cedric came back to help him, and used Expelliarmus to make the creature drop him. Unfortunately, this meant Harry fell 12 feet to the ground, landing on his injured leg. But using Stupefy along with Cedric, they stunned the spider simultaneously, causing it to fall to the ground. In the movie, they make it seem like the only obstacles are the vines of the hedges coming out to attack the champions. This doesn't happen in the book. Instead, it's a spider, a sphinx, blast-ended scroots, boggarts, and curses that turn your world upside down. Not to mention anything that Harry might not have run into. And I'd say that that's way more interesting than the movie version. But anyway, the final change of the episode is that there's no storm going through the maze, causing things to shift and eating up the champions. The movie adds this to create drama and give Cedric and Harry a reason to quickly grab the cup. But in the book, it's a lot more chill than that. Cedric stands next to an injured Harry, and instead of running after the cup, he says Harry should be the one to take it. But Harry says that Cedric deserves it. Now this is another moment that shows Cedric's integrity, because unlike the movie, Harry is completely unable to run at that moment with his injured leg. I know in the movie version, Cedric technically tells Harry to take it, but you gotta understand that in the book, Cedric is standing next to the cup, with Harry 10 feet away, completely unable to move because of his injured leg. It would have been a lot easier for Cedric in the book to just grab the cup and take the win. But Cedric says that Harry was the better champion during the tournament. Harry tried to save everyone in the second task, and Harry even saved Cedric from Crumb just moments earlier. They go back and forth quite a few times until Harry suggests that they should just take it at the same time because they're both Hogwarts champions. Harry tells Cedric that they can just count it as a win for Hogwarts. And this argument finally convinces good guy Cedric, who walks over, picks Harry up, and helps him limp to the trophy. Then, just like in the movie, they take it together. So now that you've heard all of the changes, learned about Harry's obstacles, and Cedric's excruciating moments in the maze, what do you think? Do you think they made the right decision for the movie? Let me know in the comments below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.